Welcome to another episode of Tan's Two Cents and the first episode in our C Suite series. Today, we'll discuss what makes a great Chief Strategy Officer or a CSO. I'm your host, Tan Wilson, and today we're peeling back the layers of strategic leadership at the high stakes realm of government contracting. Our guest today is Brett McLaren, who serves as a CSO for MetaPhase Consulting, one of the fastest growing technology consulting firms in the nation and recognized as one of Washington, D.C. metro area's best places to work by publications like the Washington Post and the Washington Business Journal. Brett, your strategic leadership is truly inspiring, and I've always loved the opportunity to kind of catch up and talk with you. As the CSO for MetaPhase, you lead a company dedicated to bringing technology and digital transformation solutions to the federal government. Born and raised in the DC area, a computer science systems engineer from JMU, and a master's in business administration from Georgetown University. That's like no joke. And you are truly one of those rare locals. Could you talk to us and walk us through what drew you into the world of GovCon and the path that led you to become a co-founder and the CSO at MetaPhase?
Yeah, of course. And thanks so much for having me, Tom. I don't think anyone grows up as a little kid in elementary school saying, someday when I grow up, I'd love to be a government contractor, right? But what I can say is from a young age, I was drawn to both technology and consulting for different reasons. On the technology side, it was largely about just this really unique time period that I was raised. I graduated from high school literally in the year 2000, coming up at like the heart of the dot
Yeah.
com bubble and the internet era. And gosh, if I had known how exciting and how big it really would be back then, but I had a sense. And, even in a high school class, I had an opportunity. It was like an economics class. I had an opportunity to start investing in internet stocks. It was like a high school
Oh, wow.
competition. I ended up as one of the top performers in the state and became obsessed with investing in these technology companies and learning everything I can and reading about everything I can. And that really led to kind of speculating how the world would change with the introduction of this sort of digital internet era. Um, and then in college, I got a job. First job, I was the only intern at a government event planning company of all things during the summers. And I eventually got up my nerves as a intern there at the company to ask the owner of the company to go to lunch because this company didn't even yet have a website. Imagine, early
Oh,
2000s. And I think he felt bad saying no to the lowly intern. So he agreed to meet with me, and I'd prepared this whole pitch about how, we should be building the company's first website that had real functionality about how to, manage some of the logistics of these events and do purchasing for sponsorships and things like that. Looking back, it was a digital transformation before that was even a term, you know? And to be a kid and have this opportunity, you can imagine how shocked I was when he not only
yeah.
agreed, but said, "I'd like to keep you on during the school year. You're gonna manage this project for me." And I wasn't at all prepared to do that, but it was such amazing experience at a young age to be able to kind of take on a new challenge and implement something new. And that really him being willing to do that with me has become part of the culture here at MetaPhase where we try and anyone who's got a good idea gets punished with the goal of trying to
With executing it then? Yeah.
yeah.
Be careful
So
what you ask for, be careful what you volunteer for, right?
that's right. And I studied information systems in college and I learned after a few programming classes there that I didn't wanna necessarily be the one to build the technology, but god, did I love dreaming up ideas about how to apply it to business problems. And I think that had started with that investing experience and carried over into college. And so, it drew me to consulting because that was kind of the whole idea. I wanted to take all those experiences into a consulting career. And so I ended up at Booz Allen, where I grew and learned a whole lot about the industry and what it meant to be a consultant. Like you said, eventually went back to business school and realized, this GovCon thing is actually pretty great career if you think about it. While I was in business school, I got married, we had a baby. To be able to have so much opportunity right here in the DC area to solve real problems, for the greatest government in the world is actually pretty cool. And so I got reinvigorated, I guess, in the field and that's what sort of led to eventually founding MetaPhase.
Well, great. Yeah, you found MetaPhase with Fred, right? So tell us a little bit about that and when you started the
The
company.
funny story, yeah, I met Fred on a consulting project, but under very strange circumstances. I was hired to replace Fred on a project because Fred was leaving Booz Allen and he was moving on to go to, I think, IBM at the time. Um, but we kind of did a transition, and his last day was my first day type of thing. And as Fred was leaving the building on his last day, he said, man, I just have a good feeling about you. And I said, oh, thanks. I do too. Um, Fast forward, literally 10 years later, the client that we both supported on that project, him leaving and me incoming, became our first client at MetaPhase. And so it just goes to show you, how small a world it is. And this was before LinkedIn or anything else. Like we had completely lost touch, but reconnected years later. So it's
Yeah.
funny how that happened.
It is amazing how with social media and technology now, can you imagine what you could have done back then if all of this like I think about that all the time and I've got a few more years on you. So, you were 2000, I was 93 and I'm just thinking, god, research papers in college would have been so much easier
Right.
had we had the internet, like back then. And
Tom,
what
the other big shift that really pushed for me to leave the sort of comforts of a large consulting firm and start my own, it was this notice about the trend towards small business. And that was another thing that it was honestly pure luck from the timing of when we started Metaphase. But I started to see that shift. And I was curious about like competing in a small business world and how that might be different than among a large business who kind of does everything and has expertise in so many areas. And so I took a job as a director at a company called GovCIO. I was maybe the eighth employee there or something. And of course, they've now gone on to be thousands
yeah.
upon thousands of employees. But I learned a lot in that process, and I was hooked on small business. The exposure that you got
Mm.
within a small business to do all the things that are really behind the curtain in large companies, for me, felt inspiring and exciting. And, we founded Metaphase. I was 30 years old. Like, I had not yet done all the things. I had not managed huge, teams of staff.
Yeah.
I hadn't, had huge numbers of employees or hundreds of great government contracts after a big illustrious career or anything like that, you know? But I was hungry and I had a young family on a single income and delusionally optimistic, which I think is a big part of becoming an entrepreneur, that you have to sort of have that. And this amazing business partner in Fred Costa, who's equally enthusiastic about all of this. And so we went for it.
No, that sounds great. And it seems like you have always had this very strategic, forward thinking type of mentality and almost like a sixth sense. And so I think that suits this position that we're talking about today is, chief strategy officer. And the GovCon landscape is ever evolving. It's always changing, which is why I love working in this space so much because you never know what's going to be coming around the corner or what's coming up. And those who are really successful see those and are able to kind of read those tea leaves. But there must have been like one moment or a challenge or a problem that really tested your strategic foresight. Can you share like a story with us when something like that happened?
Sure. One thing that I got really wrong that I had to learn the hard way was the importance of these GWAC contracts. 10 years ago, yes, it was a big deal, but having a GSA schedule was kind of enough. And that's when we started Metaphase. And the first one where we really felt it was CIOSP3. We didn't feel like we were ready to bid on it and the opportunity that we had. And then, years passed, the company grew a ton and we didn't have this vehicle. And it came up, hey, maybe we should try and acquire it. But I feel like it's been 6 months from being over for, like, the past 3 years, right? Because it keeps getting extended and
Yeah.
extended. But the importance of that and being locked out, created immeasurable damage to the company, I think, and missed opportunities. So when Oasis came out, which was the next sort of big GWAC contract vehicle after CISP3 for us, we stretched extremely hard to go for it. And at the time, we probably weren't really as experienced enough to try and get it, but we did everything we could and it paid off when we won that contract because without it, we would never be where we are today. We've won a big bulk of the work that we have today through that contract vehicle. So, I think the GWAC thing was one real test. And we've endured a lot of hard times in 10 years. One major government shutdown, and then the
Yeah.
threat of like 47 more of them. The pandemic, the changing landscape, like you said. I mean, everything is changing every year or two. We've lost contracts over that time, like every company has. And I go back to something that Andy Grove said from Intel. He used to say, bad companies are destroyed by crisis. Good companies
Yes.
survive a crisis, but great companies are improved by a crisis. And I try and have that mentality every time, our industry is thrown into crisis. And believe it or not, post government shutdown was our fastest growth period in our history. The second fastest was during the pandemic. And I think it's largely because of this mindset that we've been able to have as a company that like we've got to use this crisis to get better.
Wow. I I've heard that quote before. I wasn't quite sure how it went, but you're really right. And I think the really great companies and the good companies really do kind of thrive on that change. Like they're you can tell that that's kind of part of their culture is to solve a problem, to overcome an obstacle, whatever it may be. And that translates, I think, into the government space and delivering services to customers. So speaking like, let's take this discussion a little bit further. So speaking of challenges, I think this is a perfect segue into like our first main discussion point. So Brett, in your view, how has the role of a CSO on the Gov evolved, especially beyond boardroom strategies? And what's your take on this? Because everybody wants a C-suite and when we were talking before this episode, like there's everybody wants one, no one really knows how to use one. How do you define them? And it's a lot of times it's just a shallow type of, oh, it's a really cool title,
Yeah.
whatever. But it really does mean something. And so what's your take on what makes a really great CSO?
It's something we discussed, Tom, before. It means something different at every stage of the company's growth. So if you had a
Yeah.
CSO at 50 employees or at 300 or at 3,000, the roles and responsibilities of all the C-suite players, to be honest, change and evolve, right? And also, this is a role where not every company has one. Some companies, almost every company has a COO, every company has a CEO, right? But not every company has a chief strategy officer. Um, so for us, very tactically, what this role entails is the business development, capture, and GWAX within the organization. So all of those sort of growth functions live under the CSO, but also the corporate strategy, which I think is very, very, very important in a small business context. And we'll talk about that. And also the capability strategy. So where is the company investing to build new capabilities? And those decisions about capability investments are very strategic because it becomes the future of the company. And here's what I mean. Even right now, no one was an AI company 3 years ago, right? No one was an RPA company 5 or 7 years ago. And no one was a DevSecOps company 10 years ago. Those things weren't even part of the mainstream that existed. It took someone within these organizations to say, this is a capability we're going to build within the organization. And it's constantly something new, right? Who's making those decisions about where to take the company? That often becomes the role of the chief strategy officer, or in some cases when they're technology related, a CTO, if there exists one in the organization, could also either have or be part of that role. And, sitting around strategizing isn't really a full-time job, to be honest. So once you set that strategy, you then have to go and help implement it within the organization. And, to do that, you also need others in the organization, like a COO, to be able to manage your delivery of the things you already have and to keep that foundation going, because that's the foundation of everything that you're then building upon to try and become something new or better. And for us, I'm so thankful we have our COO named Beth Angerman, who works closely with Fred Costa, our CEO. Beth's a former federal SES, and so she just understands what
Yeah.
government customers expect. She holds an extremely high bar, and that allows me then to build on top of that with growth and with innovation and with pursuing those advanced capabilities. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's a team sport, right? I don't think that you should put all the onus on one person for the implementation and the growth aspects of what your business strategy is. But I think it's really important to have someone like a CSO to be
Yeah.
responsible for kind of setting the tone. And you're right. The position kind of does evolve and change depending upon your size because until you get large enough that you have someone who is doing that, I think the onus kind of falls on, and you've gone through this journey of growth. It
Mhm.
falls onto, you and Fred. Like a lot of times the founders or the co-founders or the CEO of a company in order to kind of do that and set the tone. That once you do get up to a certain point, you do need to kind of have something that's very thoughtful. But the one thing that I really appreciated what you said was that you also then need to kind of help implement that, right? It's not one of those things where you're sitting around all day pontificating like what
Right.
great ideas I have and be like, here, make my great ideas work, right? You have to roll up your sleeves and still be involved. It's not like passing the baton to someone else and walking away and doing something
I wish it
else.
was that easy, but it's not. But, I can give an example too. For a few years, we saw this problem among federal agencies where it was this fatigue around point solutions for technology. They had a system to do everything. And then you had to maintain all those systems and you had O&M on all those systems. You had cybersecurity requirements on all those systems. And there was a total fatigue around it. Those siloed solutions had just
Yeah.
added so much complexity and security challenges. They were almost not worth the effort at some point. And so we saw that and we felt some conviction around the fact that this is becoming a major issue. There weren't a lot of paper processes left. Most of those had been, systematized by this point, but now you had this messy, complex web of things. And so that led us to very sort of deliberately invest in these platform solutions that have become so popular. Things like ServiceNow and now Microsoft Power Apps and Salesforce and things of the like. And also into specific market domains where we thought, we saw a future. And so for us, we've invested heavily in the DHS market that we saw as sort of an evergreen part of the government where it wasn't Democrat or Republican. The EPA is hot during one administration and then being slashed during the next. Like those were challenges that from a market perspective that we had to be deliberate about where we wanted to invest our time. And so it kind of becomes a mix of deliberate decisions. Hey, this is where we want to go, but you also have to kind of be open to what is the market giving you? Where are the opportunities that year? And so that's been a challenge too. We wanted to invest in ServiceNow, but maybe DHS wasn't buying ServiceNow at that time. And so those two things didn't necessarily align right away. But I think that's another important role of the CSO is to kind of identify and build a hypothesis around where you think the industry is going to either have or create conviction among the rest of the organization about, that perspective and then invest to build towards it, you know?